On July 21st, 2023, a spacecraft that had been faithfully talking to Earth for 46 years without a single missed check-in simply stopped. No warning. No error message anyone could immediately decode. Just silence, pouring in from more than 12 billion miles away, where a machine humanity had built before most of its own mission engineers were even born had, for the first time in its entire working life, gone quiet. That spacecraft was Voyager 2. And what NASA discovered when they finally got it talking again, using a technique so extreme it had never been necessary before in the entire history of the mission, didn't just save one aging probe. It exposed exactly how fragile our only working connection to interstellar space really is, and it forced engineers to confront, in real time, a preview of the exact moment they know is still coming for good. It's the kind of story that doesn't get less unsettling with time. Even now, in 2026, with Voyager 2 still transmitting, still healthy, still doing exactly what it's done for nearly 5 decades, the 2023 silence remains the clearest, most concrete demonstration anyone has ever gotten of just how thin the thread connecting us to this spacecraft actually is, and how close that thread came to snapping entirely over something as small as a 2-degree pointing error. To understand why this particular silence mattered so much, you have to understand what Voyager 2 actually is. Launched from Cape Canaveral on August 20th, 1977, Voyager 2 is, alongside its twin Voyager 1, one of only 2 human-made objects to have ever traveled far enough to reach interstellar space, the region beyond the heliosphere, the vast magnetic bubble the sun's solar wind inflates around our entire solar system. Voyager 2 actually launched before Voyager 1, though its twin, sent on a faster trajectory, quickly overtook it and reached several of their shared destinations first, which is part of why Voyager 1 tends to get more of the public attention, despite being the younger of the pair in terms of build sequence. Before either spacecraft ever reached the edge of the solar system, Voyager 2 completed something no other spacecraft has managed before or since: a full grand tour of all 4 outer giant planets, flying past Jupiter in 1979, Saturn in 1981, Uranus in 1986, and Neptune in 1989, using each planet's gravity to slingshot toward the next, in a sequence made possible by a rare planetary alignment that only occurs once every 175 years, one that wouldn't come around again until long after everyone currently working on the mission has retired. To this day, Voyager 2 remains the only spacecraft that has ever visited either Uranus or Neptune up close, meaning every single piece of direct, close-up data humanity has about those 2 ice giants traces back to this one spacecraft's brief, one-time passes decades ago. Along the way, it discovered active volcanoes on Jupiter's moon, Io, mapped the intricate structure of Saturn's rings in far greater detail than ever before, and captured the first, and still only, close-up images of Neptune's great dark spot and its geologically active moon Triton. Voyager 1 crossed into interstellar space in 2012. Voyager 2 followed in November 2018, becoming just the second spacecraft in history to leave the sun's direct influence behind entirely. Confirmed by a sudden, sharp change in the particles and magnetic fields its instruments were measuring as it passed through the heliopause, the boundary where the constant outward pressure of the solar wind finally gives way to the pressure of the interstellar medium beyond. By the summer of 2023, Voyager 2 had been traveling for nearly 46 years, was more than 12 billion miles from Earth, and remained remarkably still fully operational, still returning genuine scientific data about the environment of deep interstellar space that no other instrument humanity has ever built could gather. On July 21st, flight controllers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory sent Voyager 2 a routine, planned series of commands, part of the kind of periodic maintenance every long-duration mission requires, the sort of housekeeping instruction that had been sent to the same spacecraft thousands of times before without incident across nearly 5 decades of operation. Something in that sequence went wrong. The commands inadvertently caused Voyager 2's antenna to tilt just 2 degrees away from Earth. That doesn't sound like much. 2 degrees is barely a shift you'd notice pointing a flashlight across a room. But at a distance of 12 billion miles, a 2-degree error in pointing is more than enough to send Voyager 2's transmission beam missing Earth entirely, sailing off silently into some other patch of empty sky. While at the very same moment, Earth's own giant receiving dishes had nothing pointed precisely enough at Voyager 2 to catch anything coming back the other way either. To put that 2-degree error into perspective, consider what it actually means at that kind of distance. Voyager 2's high-gain antenna transmits a signal in a tightly focused beam, precisely because a spacecraft with limited power has to concentrate every available watt into as narrow and directed a stream as possible in order for that signal to still be detectable across billions of miles of empty space by the time it reaches Earth. A beam that precise and that narrow is also, by the same physics, extremely unforgiving of even tiny pointing errors. Widen the angle by just 2 degrees over a distance of 12 billion miles, And the resulting geometric spread means the beam ends up displaced by an enormous distance by the time it would have reached Earth, missing our planet entirely and continuing on forever into deep space instead, carrying data nobody would ever actually receive. The result was total, mutual silence. Voyager 2 was almost certainly fine, almost certainly still faithfully transmitting data exactly as programmed, completely unaware that its own antenna had drifted just far enough off target to make every word it said vanish into the dark. And NASA had no way to immediately fix it, because fixing it required sending a new command, and there was no way to send Voyager 2 a corrective command if Voyager 2's antenna wasn't pointed at Earth to receive it in the first place. It was a closed loop with no obvious way in, a spacecraft that could only be told how to fix its own broken hearing through the very channel that the mistake had just severed. There was one thing working in NASA's favor, and it's a small design detail that turned out to matter enormously. Voyager 2 carries a built-in safeguard. Several times a year, if the spacecraft goes too long without receiving new commands from Earth, it's programmed to automatically execute a series of reset maneuvers designed to reorient its antenna back toward our planet, a kind of automatic course correction routine built in decades earlier, specifically to guard against exactly this sort of long-distance communication failure. It's a remarkable piece of forward planning from engineers working in the 1970s, essentially building a fail-safe into the spacecraft's programming for a scenario nobody could specifically predict. Just a general acknowledgement that something, somewhere, someday, might knock the antenna out of alignment, and that the spacecraft needed some way to correct itself without waiting on instructions that might never arrive. The problem was timing. That next scheduled reset wasn't due until October 15th, nearly 3 months away. NASA's mission team faced an uncomfortable choice: wait patiently for Voyager 2's own internal programming to eventually fix the problem on its own schedule, or find some way to intervene sooner. 3 months of total silence, with no way to confirm the spacecraft's health in the meantime, no way to know if some other unrelated problem might also be quietly developing, was not an outcome anyone wanted to simply accept if there was any faster alternative worth attempting. They chose to intervene, and the method they used had never been necessary in the entire history of the Voyager program. NASA's Deep Space Network operates a collection of enormous radio dish antennas positioned around the globe, in California, Spain, and Australia, spaced roughly 120 degrees apart, so that as Earth rotates, at least one of them always has a clear line of sight to wherever in the sky a given spacecraft happens to be. This network handles communications with nearly every deep space mission NASA currently operates, from Mars rovers to outer planet probes to the 2 Voyagers, coordinating an enormous continuous juggling act of scheduling time on a limited number of dishes across dozens of competing missions, each with their own communication needs and priorities. For this recovery attempt, engineers turned to the largest and most powerful transmitter available anywhere in the network, the 70-meter dish at the Deep Space Network's Canberra, Australia facility, the same dish used for the most demanding, most distant communications NASA conducts anywhere in the solar system. That dish, wide enough to cover the better part of a football field, represented the single best tool available anywhere on the planet for punching a signal cleanly across 12 billion miles of empty space. On August 2nd, 2023, that dish was used to send a signal engineers nicknamed the Interstellar Shout, a command deliberately transmitted with vastly more power and precision than a routine instruction would ever require, aimed at forcing Voyager 2's antenna to physically shift those same 2 degrees back into alignment, on the hope that raw signal strength alone might be enough to punch through and be heard by a spacecraft that, for all anyone knew, might not be listening in quite the right direction anymore. The name wasn't just dramatic flourish for the sake of a good headline. It genuinely captured what the maneuver was. Rather than a normal polite instruction sent at standard strength and simply trusting the spacecraft would be pointed correctly to receive it, this was closer to shouting as loudly as physically possible in the general direction of where Voyager 2 was supposed to be, in the hope that even an imperfectly aimed antenna might still catch enough of that amplified signal to correctly interpret the command buried inside it. Then came the wait. Because of the sheer distance involved, it took more than 18 hours for that single command, traveling at the speed of light, to cross the gap between Earth and Voyager 2. And if it worked, it would take another 18 hours after that for any confirming response to travel all the way back. That's a full day and a half of simply not knowing. Mission engineers who had already been managing weeks of unplanned silence, having done everything they could think to do, now facing an additional 36 hours with no way to speed up the answer, no matter how badly they wanted one. There was a glimmer of hope before that, though, worth mentioning on its own. Even during the silent weeks before the Interstellar Shout was attempted, NASA's Deep Space Network had managed to detect a faint but genuine heartbeat signal still coming from Voyager 2's general direction, a basic carrier signal indicating the spacecraft's transmitter was still active and functioning, even though no actual data could be decoded from it. It wasn't conversation, it was closer to catching a distant, wordless hum confirming that someone, somewhere out there, was still breathing, even if they couldn't yet be understood. That heartbeat mattered enormously to the morale of the recovery effort, even though it couldn't tell engineers anything specific about the spacecraft's instruments, its antenna orientation, or the true severity of the problem. It simply confirmed that Voyager 2 hadn't suffered some far more catastrophic failure, that whatever had gone wrong was, at minimum, survivable, and that there was still something worth shouting toward. On August 4th, 2023, the wait ended. Voyager 2 began returning real, decodable data again. The Interstellar shout had worked. Project manager Suzanne Dodd described the moment in strikingly personal terms. I just sort of sighed. I melted in the chair. Project scientist Linda Spilker, hearing the news, put it more simply, Voyager's back. After 2 weeks of total silence, the longest gap NASA had ever experienced with either Voyager spacecraft in the entire history of the mission, Voyager 2 was talking again, its antenna correctly repointed, its instruments confirmed healthy, its stream of interstellar data flowing normally once more. Here's what actually changed, and why this single incident mattered so much more than a 2-week scare that ended happily. It gave NASA's own engineers, many of whom have spent entire careers on this one mission, an unscheduled, unwanted dress rehearsal for something they already knew was coming eventually, anyway. The day Voyager 2 goes silent for the last time. Suzanne Dodd herself said as much afterward, describing events like this one as genuinely frightening, specifically because they're a preview of an ending everyone working on the mission already knows is unavoidable, just not yet knows the exact date of. We've been very clever over the last 10 years to eke out every single little watt, Dodd said, reflecting on just how carefully the team has had to manage the spacecraft's slowly failing power supply. Hopefully, one of them will make it to 50. But they are old, and certainly events like this one that just happened scare the dickens out of me as far as making that type of a milestone. That comment gets right to the heart of why this particular silence carried more weight than a routine technical glitch. Both Voyager spacecraft run on radioisotope thermoelectric generators, devices that convert heat from decaying plutonium into electricity, and that power output only ever declines year after year with no way to recharge or replace it. NASA has spent the years since that 2023 incident managing an increasingly delicate balancing act, deliberately powering down individual scientific instruments one at a time, specifically to conserve whatever electricity remains for as long as humanly possible. In September 2024, engineers shut off Voyager 2's plasma science instrument for good, the device that had been measuring the flow of charged particles around the spacecraft since before launch. In early 2025, they went further, powering down Voyager 2's low-energy charged particle instrument and Voyager 1's cosmic ray subsystem within weeks of each other, deliberate, planned shutdowns rather than failures, made purely to stretch the spacecraft's dwindling power reserve further into the future. As of 2026, both Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are down to just 3 operational science instruments each, out of the 10 each spacecraft originally launched with in 1977. And yet, despite those losses, mission engineers continue to describe both spacecraft as expected to keep at least one instrument functioning into the 2030s, a genuinely remarkable statement for machines nearing 50 years old, running on a power source that fades a little more with every passing year. NASA's own public messaging about the mission now carries an explicit, unusual caveat. Unforeseen circumstances, the agency says plainly, could change that timeline at any moment, exactly the kind of unpredictable event the 2023 antenna incident turned out to be. Linda Spilker has been consistently direct about why every remaining instrument and every remaining year of contact matters as much as it does. The science data that the Voyagers are returning gets more valuable the farther away from the sun they go, she's explained. So we are definitely interested in keeping as many science instruments operating for as long as possible. That's not a sentimental attachment to an old piece of hardware. It's a straightforward scientific fact. Nothing else humanity has ever built is out where the Voyagers currently are, meaning every additional month either spacecraft manages to keep transmitting is a month of genuinely irreplaceable data about a region of space no other instrument can currently reach, gathered by 2 probes that will likely never be followed by anything else, exploring the exact same stretch of interstellar territory for decades, possibly longer. The 2023 silence also exposed something less technical and more human about this entire mission, just how thin the margin for error really is, after nearly 5 decades of operating machines that were never designed with today's level of aging and decay in mind. A 2-degree pointing error, the kind of small, almost forgivable mistake that would barely register in most everyday contexts, was enough to sever contact with humanity's most distant working spacecraft for 2 full weeks, and very nearly for 3 months, had NASA simply waited on the scheduled autonomous reset instead of risking the unprecedented interstellar shout. Every command sent to either Voyager now carries that same underlying risk, a risk that grows rather than shrinks with each passing year. As both spacecraft continue drifting farther from Earth, their signals growing fainter, their onboard systems continuing to age in an environment no engineer designing them in the 1970s ever expected them to still be operating in. Consider what that margin actually looks like in practice. Every instruction sent to Voyager 2 today has to travel roughly 19 hours one way before it even arrives, meaning any single mistake in a command sequence isn't caught and corrected in seconds, the way it might be on a nearby satellite. It's caught, if it's caught at all, only after nearly 2 full days have already passed, one direction to reach the spacecraft, and another for any consequence of that mistake to become visible back on Earth. Engineers working this mission are, in a very real sense, operating machinery they can't watch in real time, sending commands into a delay so long that by the time they learn whether something went wrong, the situation may already have been unfolding, uncorrected, for the better part of 2 days. There's also a reason engineers were willing to gamble on something as untested and aggressive as the interstellar shout, rather than simply waiting out the safer, scheduled reset. Every week of silence was also a week without any confirmation that Voyager 2's other systems, its power supply, its onboard computer, its remaining instruments, were still functioning normally. A spacecraft that goes silent for an expected, understood reason is one thing. A spacecraft that goes silent with an unconfirmed, growing list of things that could also quietly be going wrong underneath that silence is another matter entirely. And it's part of why NASA ultimately chose to risk an unprecedented maneuver rather than simply wait for October and hope for the best. There's a reason this particular spacecraft's silence landed so hard with the public, beyond the pure technical drama of the recovery itself. Both Voyager probes carry the Golden Record, a phonograph disc containing sounds and images meant to represent Earth to any intelligence that might one day encounter the spacecraft long after humanity itself is gone. Greetings in dozens of languages, music, spanning cultures and centuries, natural sounds of wind, thunder, and animal calls. It's a strange thing to remember while reading about antenna alignment errors and radio dish specifications, but it's also exactly why so many people who otherwise have no connection to space exploration still felt a genuine pang of unease at the news that Voyager 2 had gone quiet. This isn't simply an aging piece of scientific hardware. It's the closest thing humanity has ever sent out into the universe, carrying a deliberate message about who we are. And for 2 weeks in the summer of 2023, nobody could say for certain whether that message, along with everything else the spacecraft still had left to tell us, was still safely being carried forward at all. That emotional weight is part of why Suzanne Dodd's simple description of the recovery, sighing and melting into her chair, resonated so widely beyond the usual community of space enthusiasts who follow this mission closely. It wasn't the reaction of an engineer clearing a routine technical ticket. It was the reaction of someone who had spent 2 weeks genuinely uncertain whether one of the most significant scientific and cultural achievements in human history had just permanently slipped out of reach, replaced in that instant by relief that it hadn't, at least not yet. It's worth being clear about the timeline here too, since a spacecraft story like this one doesn't simply end with a single dramatic recovery. Voyager 2's antenna was successfully repointed in August 2023. And the spacecraft has continued operating and transmitting data every year since, through 2024, 2025, and into 2026, with NASA continuing its careful, deliberate program of powering down individual instruments to preserve whatever electricity remains. The 2023 incident didn't permanently change Voyager 2's trajectory or its long-term prospects in any physical sense. What it changed was something quieter and, in some ways, more significant. It gave everyone managing this mission, and everyone watching it from the outside, an unmistakably concrete sense of exactly how this story is eventually going to end, and just how little warning anyone might get when it finally does. Because the honest, unavoidable truth is that day is still coming. Whether it arrives through a slow, managed decline as NASA continues rationing power and instruments one at a time, the way it's been doing for years now, or through another sudden, unplanned event exactly like July 2023, an antenna nudged the wrong way, a command misinterpreted, a decades-old component finally giving out after 50 years of continuous operation in the harshest environment humanity has ever asked a piece of its own technology to survive in. NASA doesn't get to choose which version happens. All the agency can do is keep managing the spacecraft as carefully as it possibly can, keep every remaining instrument running as long as the physics of decaying plutonium will allow, and hope that whichever version of the ending eventually arrives, it comes with enough warning, or enough luck, to let the mission close out on its own terms, rather than in another unplanned 36-hour silence with no guaranteed interstellar shout waiting to bring it back. There's also no guarantee the interstellar shout trick would even work a second time, or a third. It succeeded in 2023 in part because the underlying problem was a known mechanical one, a specific antenna misalignment that a strong enough signal could plausibly correct. A different kind of failure, a genuine hardware fault rather than a pointing error, a power system finally dropping below the threshold needed to keep the transmitter itself running, wouldn't respond to a louder shout no matter how much power NASA's largest dish could muster. The 2023 recovery was, in that sense, a best-case scenario for what a Voyager failure could look like. It's entirely possible that whatever eventually does silence these spacecraft for good won't be nearly so forgiving or so solvable the next time. What actually changed in the end wasn't Voyager 2's mission or its data. What changed was everyone's understanding of exactly how close to the edge this remarkable, decades-old mission has quietly been operating the entire time. And just how much of its continued survival now depends on a mixture of careful engineering, dwindling power, and a fair amount of pure luck holding out just a little longer. 2 weeks of silence, a single overpowered command fired across 12 billion miles on the strength of hope as much as engineering certainty, and a project manager melting into her chair with relief. Together, did more to communicate the fragility of this 50-year-old mission than any official NASA press release about power budgets or instrument shutdowns ever could on its own. It's a strange kind of milestone to sit with. Not a discovery, not a new image of some distant world, but a 2-week gap in an otherwise unbroken conversation, followed by the loudest, most desperate message humanity has ever deliberately aimed at one of its own machines, just to hear it say hello again. That, in the end, is what actually changed. Not the science, not the spacecraft's trajectory or its instruments, just our own newly sharpened understanding of exactly how precarious and exactly how precious every single one of Voyager 2's remaining transmissions really is. What do you think NASA should do if a silence like this happens again, closer to the true end of the mission's remaining power? Let us know in the comments, and if you want to be here the moment engineers announce the next instrument shutdown, or the moment either Voyager spacecraft eventually does fall silent for good, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Because, after 49 years of talking to us from farther away than anything else humanity has ever built, every single message either spacecraft sends back is one we genuinely can't guarantee we'll ever hear again.